Let's talk about classes. So in the last video, you see the struct car that has three member variables. They are the make, the model, and the year. As you can see, the code is a little bit messy because when we see out, we are repeating the same code over and over again for your car and my car. So ideal case, we should reuse code so that we don't have to rewrite the code over and over again. And as you can guess, it will be a function. But what about if the function is connected to the data type car, so that all the cars will be printed out the same way? The ideal case is we can use the some syntax like this and say my car, and then print out the information passed in the output stream. And this is exactly what we are going to do. So we would implement something called classes. We would, like struct, create our own data type. But besides the member variables, a class can also have member functions. This is our first car class implementation in this module. Why is number one? Because there's many of them that will demonstrate different concepts in the class. Here is a very simple car class that has make, model, year, just like before, and then has the keyword public and followed by the member function print car. Notice also that the semicolon at the end, we will need it, and then it start with the keyword class. So in the last video, we used the keyword struct. Now we use the keyword class. One thing you need to know is that everything that's within a class are default to private. And so when we need to make something available, for example, the print car function, because you would be declaring a object, and then you would call the print car through that object to print that particular object's values, right? So that's why we would use keywords called public and private when we define a class, because everything followed by public colon will be public, and so sometimes you will have to switch back to private, depends on how you arrange your member variables and the functions. Using public keyword will make everything that follow accessible by anyone, just like in the struct, because you can if you remember, my car.make is actually available, but in the case of classes, it's not available by default. And also later on in our module, we will talk about why we don't want it to be. So if it's a public variable or functions, you can use the dot operator to access it, like so. And if it's within the class, you can just plain using print car to print out the car information. Keyword private will make everything after it unavailable to outsider, but available for everyone in the class, or it's going to be used by functions in the same class, and you don't need the dot operator. So how to implement a member function? When we say implement, it's basically writing the code to make it function the way you want, right? Do your thing. So before the print car, you actually has to specify the data type that you are implementing. You can see, later on in the demo where we are putting this implementation. So that's the colon car print car, and then you do your thing, like you're defining or implementing other functions. But interestingly, in the class situation, we call this implementation. And just so you know, there's a little bit of mix up in the word that we use to describe it, even in the book, but you'll figure it out. So let's look at some code. So here is the new class that we have, the class number 1. And then you can see very simply we are just printing out the information of the car. However, you will notice one thing is that we have no way to set up the value of make and model and year in this implementation. But I do want to let you see how a simple structure looks like. So we will continue to the next video, and we will talk about how to make it possible to set up make model year when these variables actually are private. But let's be prepared though. So let's write the print car function like we are able to access them first. So if year is bigger than 0, then we would output the years. You can see we put the class definition before the main function. We put the print car, the implementation after the main function, just like we declare other functions. And the return type will be in the front, and then we would use the data type's name and then colon before the member functions, basically the parameters and its names. So here we use a counter to count if there are information about the car. And so if year is 0, we increment the count by 1. If make is empty, we do the same. If not, we output the make. Same for the model. And so if the count equals to 3, then we would just say this is a car, so that we print out something instead of nothing. So this is our current implementation. You can see that we also need the include string because we are using string as the data type for some of the variables. So let's run the code. And you see right now this only prints out this is a car. So now let's recap. We have talked about how to define our own class, our own data type. We have talked about that in classes we have member variables and functions, and all of them are default to private. We talk about the keyword private and public, and how to access or if you need the dot operator to access or modify your private your variables. And then we also talk about how to implement member functions, and that we need to use the colon in front of the member function names when we implement it. Next, we are going to talk about constructors, how to set up or initiate a object's member values.